So welcome back. We are running a little late, so we need to start because we have still a number of presentations and we want to do justice also to the timing. And this is my privilege, my joy to welcome now to this presentation Professor Jörg Fegert and Dr. Ulrike Hoffmann. As Jörg said in his introduction, we have been working now for 13 years together in the establishment of the Center for Child Protection, out of which the Institute of Anthropology grew. We have been working in different capacities together, and we have started this academic day 3 years ago. So it's really a privilege to introduce to you Professor Fegert, who is the Medical Director of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychotherapy at Ulm University in the south of Germany. He founded the Baden-Württemberg Competence Center for Child Protection in Medicine and leads the Trauma Research Center at Ulm. This is a small phrase, only a few words, but this is to his credit an enormous achievement in times when money, public money, for health issues and trauma-related issues diminishes. He succeeded in establishing that center with a lot of public funding, and this is a huge success, so congratulations on that. Jörg is advisor of numerous scientific and political committees, including for the German government. He's been researching prevention of child sexual abuse and clinical issues for many years. Dr. Ulrike Hoffmann has her doctorate at the medicine faculty. She's currently working at the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Psychosomatics and Psychotherapy at the University Hospital in Ulm. She heads the working group Knowledge Transfer, Dissemination and E-Learning. She recently completed her habilitation with a thesis on the topic of, quote, violence and violence prevention in medical institutions, frequencies, risk factors, and the development of protection concepts. And she is also a member of the independent commission at the German government's level into child sexual abuse. So they will present together on the multiple roles of women in safeguarding. Please.
I will start. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Hans. So we structured that talk in 3 parts. As a man, I will talk about the role of women in developing safeguarding measures, and come back a bit to the issue of women as perpetrators of sexual violence and how this can be considered when we talk about safeguarding measures. And Ulrike then will go to the consideration of gender-specific aspects in the development of safeguarding measures. So this is a slide we often show when we talk together about this, because for us, safeguarding consists of 2 major components. It is the institution as a safe space, so you need the development of safeguarding measures, but an institution also has to be a place of competence. So if there is somebody that complains, that comes to your ear, you have to be able to react in these cases. So we have to build up attitudes and competences, and not only rules and regulations, but we have to be able to react to an information. And what do women contribute to the development of safeguarding measures? I think one of the most important elements, if I look back to the last 3 days, it's a diversity of perspectives. Women in the church represent many different perspectives. Religious women, employees, just lay people, parish members, mothers. So they add very important perspectives. And they also can be, and often are, victims of violence. So they often also can speak about that and can bring into the discussion this perspective. We often talk about sexual abuse as if that would be something, a research subject, something out of our space, but I'm sure that in that auditorium, men and women have been abused in their lives, and this perspective of the victims is a very important perspective. And I think it's important, as I already said at the beginning, to look at the underlying power relations. And I always like to start with an example from our work in medicine, because I'm not working in the church context, but I'm a powerful man in a medical institution. I had roles as a dean and so on. And 2 years ago, we made an inquiry on sexual harassment of nurses and doctors and all other workers in the hospitals of Baden-Württemberg, in the state university hospitals of Baden-Württemberg. And around 10,000 people responded. That's a fifth of the complete population of workers there. And the lifetime prevalence was that 70% of the women working in these hospitals had an experience of sexual harassment at work during their lifetime, and more than a third during the last year. So it's a big issue. As I already said, sometimes counting is important, to have data is important, to see the dimension of the problem. And we asked them what had been the consequences of their experience of harassment. 60%, about 60% had been irritated. There was an irritation, and that had an influence of their joy of working, of going to work, of their love of their work. 38% reacted with disgust and didn't want to meet again certain persons they were forced to work together with. Yeah? And 4% gave up her job in reaction to this. And this was the thing that convinced our board of directors to start a campaign and to do something on that, because we need the workforce and we have to care for the people in these situations. So transfer that to the church. We talked about abuse of religious women. We talked about many situations on a case base, yeah? But we don't know the dimension. We feel it. And I think it's important to have data also about the dimension to really convince superiors and people in power. Then we talked about these gender role stereotypes, the women as protectors, supporters, and helpers, and the men as perpetrators, offenders, and often mighty men in institution. And I think that humility of women often is also a risk for women as bystanders, because they think if men say that's okay like this, they don't feel free to react. So we have to talk about gender stereotypes and gender roles. And when we think about the preconditions for implementing safeguarding measures, we need a need for transparency, control, and participation. That means if we start into safeguarding, we need a clear mandate. We need enforcement of power. The diocese, the bishop, has to enforce it If not, you are on a lost post. And therefore you need also authority in hierarchical decisions, and you need the legal power. Women can form networks and strengthen participation of victims, participation of all sorts of people involved in the parish in these processes to bring about structural change. But we also need powerful men and powerful women, as we have seen here during that conference, that really see their obligation to support this work. We can't give that to certain people to clean up the mess. The hierarchy has to stand behind them, yeah? And it has to be an issue of everybody. In many institutions, like in mine, women play a central role in education and prevention work. They do trainings, workshops, counseling, and they can help raise awareness of sexual violence. And I think it's very important, as I said, to develop these competencies and to create safe spaces where women and men, and often separate spaces, where they can speak openly. Yeah? And that's a need. We discussed about that during that conference. Women are involved in many levels of concept development, and sometimes I have the feeling at many conferences 20 years or 30 years ago when I started research in that field, I was the only man, and you get the feeling that this topic is left to women. Usually men always want to have the lead in these things, but this issue seems to be in some way embarrassing. And if we look in Germany to the Roman Catholic Church, to the prevention offices, we have 22 women and 10 men. And I think that's an ideal example that in 3 dioceses, a couple, a man and a woman, work together in that field to bring in these different perspectives. So the participation of women in that kind of research and development brings in more perspective, perhaps also more control, and less cover-ups. And we have to address these blind spots we talked about this morning, for example. Then there might be a reduction of these homogeneous male networks. Yeah? I know that men speak differently if women are present in the room or not. So this is helpful to talk together. Yeah? I don't know the other side, how women speak among each other, yeah? But I think we have to have that reduction of homogeneity in certain networks. And I just told you that story that many institutions have their own rules. They are often not written rules. Hoffmann told us in his book Asylums. But these rules, they contribute to the fact that abuse is possible. Yeah? And if we mix up these closed societies, if we bring an external perspective and a different gender perspective into safeguarding discussions, this is very important. So we need genuine participation and not only symbolic decoration by victims of abuse and by women in these processes. It has to be a cooperation on an integrative level. And as I said many times today, women are not automatically better. They can also be part of perpetration or cover-up systems. So we really have to have a common consent on the ethical background of our safeguarding programs. And it's about everybody who works in the church or in the hospital. There are no different rules, but perhaps there are very different perspectives. And I think that women's participation in this program is also an indicator of commitment to change. I think the involvement of women on all these levels, for example, in our hospitals, in the board of directors, made a big change. Yeah? Because before that, that perspective was not heard. So, coming back to that issue of this morning, women as perpetrators of sexual violence and safeguarding measures. Female perpetrators are often more difficult to identify, and their actions are less likely to be labeled as violence, as we heard. So we need, when we talk about safeguarding, a sensitization on the fact that it is here, like Jelena Gerke did it at the beginning, with these same questions that permuted a male or a female perpetrator, yeah? To learn about our own position. But also the victims have more problems to classify the act that happened. And they don't find people where they can talk about that, because most of the professionals in that field are women. And many of them think that women cannot be perpetrators. Yeah? So we have a blind spot in that, and we have these institutional dynamics and taboos. So I think that is very important that we focus on that. I can skip that one because I already told you that the German Bishops' Conference, in all its wisdom, thought that abuse by women cannot happen, therefore it was not investigated in Germany. And we have these structural and cultural expectations of female perpetrators, and something we heard this morning was a bit like in the old Madonna Putana scheme. Either a woman is nearly a saint, or a woman that is really doing criminal acts is no longer a woman. Yeah? And I think we have to differentiate and see that all kinds of problems can be there. So we have that double silence in cases of violence by women, of those who experience abuse, and our prototypes of sexual violence we have in our minds, and we have to address these stereotypes, these stereotypic ideations. And a holistic approach to protection must therefore not be gender blind. We have to have that gender perspective when we talk about perpetrators in institutions, and that's a big implication for safeguarding. For my part, I come to the conclusion we need the support from powerful people in decision-making positions, because if the management of a hospital, in my example, does not support and enforce safeguarding measures, no protection can be provided. You can have wonderful papers and you can have a wonderful working group. If you can't sanction, if you can't react to what is happening in some way, you are a lame duck. Then we need protected spaces where women can talk without fear of male domination about power and abuse of power, and about child protection and their own experiences. And we need, of course, the mutual exchange. And now I hand over to Ulrike, just saying one last word on the abuse of religious women. We had these case examples that were very, very moving. And to say, as in a hospital where abuse occurs, you can't protect children if you have the example of the adults that shows that abuse of power is possible. And that's the same in the church. In an environment where sisters can be abused by priests, by bishops, you can't have a safe space for children. So these things go together, and we really have to explore these forms of abuse of power. Ulrike, may I hand over to you? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I will now come to the third part of the lecture with some more practical aspects concerning the consideration of gender-specific aspects in development of safeguarding measures. So, as we heard a lot of in this conference, gender plays a critical role in both risk and protection strategies, and women and girls may face specific vulnerabilities due power imbalances, due societal roles, and due stereotypes. So we must address, on one side, the individual safety of girls and women, and we must, on the other side, address structural factors, structural risk factors, and we should have structural awareness of the issue. So what needs to be addressed when we think of the consideration of gender-specific aspects in the development of safeguarding measures? First we find risk factors or risk situations for abuse in general. And girls and boys can have a different perspective on the same situation, and we have to look at this. Then we have gender-specific risk areas where we have to ask where are boys more at risk and where are girls more at risk. And in a male-dominated organization like Roman Catholic Church, safeguarding measures must specifically address the protection of girl and women. Then we must have a look on or focus on gender-related stereotypes about perpetrator and victims. We already heard of that in the talks of Jelena Gerke and Safir Tostan in the morning. So these stereotypes must be reflected by the professionals. And we have to consider intersectionality. I come back to that point later. What is very important in the development of safeguarding measures is participation. All groups must be involved with their specific perspective in the development of safeguarding measures. The girls and the boys in the institutions, the employees, the parents, and what is a very important perspective is the perspective of survivors. We have in Germany the Survivors Board at the Independent Commissioner for Child Sexual Abuse Issues, and the survivors are different in gender, in age, in social background, and affected by abuse and in different contexts. And so they can bring up a lot of specific perspective on different institutions and also on family contexts. Yeah, maybe you remember this slide from 2 years ago, a talk of Professor Fegert about prevention. I will have a focus on the right column with a selective point of selective prevention, because selective prevention has a target group at risk groups. And one group who is at risk are girls and women and their specific perspective. So what can be potential steps and actions if we consider gender-related aspects? One is gender-specific empowerment to strengthen self-efficacy, to provide safe spaces for reflection and participation. Second one is staff training on gender sensitivity. Regular training is very important and should include how to recognize and address gender-specific risks, and also gender-specific patterns of awareness and behavior in cases of child sexual abuse. Third is tailored educational and information materials. We should develop materials that address the needs and the different realities of girls and boys, and also ensuring inclusivity. We should develop the specific elements of safeguarding measures considering gender-specific aspects. 2 examples. It could be useful to do a gender-specific risk analysis, to conduct a risk analysis separate between boys and girls with separate risk interviews or questionnaires, and use a language and scenarios that reflect their different socialization. Or within a complaint system, you could consider gender-specific barriers to reporting abuse. It's also important to incorporate intersectionality. We heard last year in the conference about the problems of the deaf women to talk about abuse because they are women and they are deaf, so they have 2 vulnerabilities. And we should include such aspects in our safeguarding efforts. And we should do monitoring and evaluation. So we should collect data separately by gender, who reports at what stage, through which channels to identify a gap in our safeguarding efforts. Yeah, when I prepared these slides, I made a small literature research on what are publications about gender-specific aspects. And the problem is you don't find much literature. You find literature on frequencies in various institutions by gender and on barriers to report sexual abuse, but hardly any practical examples have been published to date. So my assumption is that significantly more approaches are already being used in practical safeguarding than the number of publications would suggest. So my final conclusion, from a research perspective, we need maybe more approaches in safeguarding that include gender-specific aspects, but we need definitely more scientific publication of gender-specific approaches in safeguarding. So I encourage you, if you develop an approach, gender-specific approach, please evaluate it, maybe with a questionnaire or with interviews, and make a publication. Thank you.